I'm Harper Whitaker, 31 years old. And at my father's retirement dinner, my mother stood up with a stack of hand-lettered envelopes and handed out legacy letters, like she was distributing diplomas at a ceremony only certain children had qualified for. My older brother got one. My younger sister got one. Both of my cousins who happened to be in town got one. Even my father's golf buddy Reggie, who wasn't technically family but was sitting at the table because he'd driven my dad to physical therapy for 6 weeks. I got an envelope with his name, written in my mother's careful calligraphy. Then my mother walked right past my chair, set the empty tray down with a soft clink, and said, in the same breezy voice she used to announce that dessert was ready, "Oh, sweetheart, don't poot. You already know how we feel about you." My aunt, sitting 2 seats down, laughed first and added, "Besides, Harper doesn't need paper to feel appreciated. She's the independent one." The table laughed. My father chuckled into his wine glass. My brother actually patted my shoulder, like that was comfort. I didn't cry. I didn't leave. I just lined up my silverware very neatly on the edge of my plate, looked around that long mahogany table in my parents' Charleston dining room, and said, "Got it. Thank you for the clarity. That should have been the worst of it." It wasn't. Because humiliations like that don't begin at the dinner that finally breaks you. They begin 15, 20, 30 years earlier. In the small daily arithmetic of who gets praised and who gets handed the grocery list, who gets the recital flowers, and who gets asked to film it. And exactly 8 days after that retirement dinner, at 8:45 on a Sunday morning, and the same people who had laughed were standing on the porch of my row house in Savannah, Georgia, ringing my doorbell in a frantic, unbroken pattern, shouting through the door that I had to let them in right this second, that I was ruining everything, that I was the only one who could fix this before it got worse. I stood in my kitchen holding a mug of black coffee, and for the first time in my adult life, I let them keep shouting, before I tell you what they wanted, and what I had already done that was collapsing around them. Tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is on your clock. I'm curious how far a story like this carries when a woman finally stops absorbing her own family's damage. My mother is Marlene Whitaker, 61, former PTA president, current chair of the Low Country Heritage Garden Society. My father is Gerald, just retired from 33 years as a partner at a regional accounting firm. My older brother is Bennett, 34, a mortgage broker who has never in his life been told no and survived it. My younger sister is Colette, 27, recently engaged, and the official family baby, even though she's almost 30, and the aunt who laughed first that night, the one who always laughs first, is my mother's sister Renata Pembroke, who built an entire identity out of turning meanness into what our family calls good-natured ribbing, and then calling anyone who flinches from it too sensitive. If the retirement dinner had been a single bad night, maybe I could have folded it away in the drawer, where I kept all the other single bad nights. But it wasn't a night. It was a reveal. It made the quiet truth of my family loud enough that strangers would have heard it. In the Whitaker house, I was never the daughter who got celebrated. I was the daughter who got deployed. Colette got birthday parties. I got assignments. Bennett got speeches at graduations. I got, "You're the one who handles things. Harper, just take care of it." When I was 15 and made regional finals in chamber orchestra, my mother missed the concert because Colette had a minor part in a school play across town. When I was 23 and opened my small branding studio in downtown Savannah, my father celebrated by asking whether I could put together a logo package for his friend's wife's new catering company. At cost. As a favor. You're so talented at this sort of thing. He said. It would mean a lot. That became the shape of everything. Every spring for the last 6 years, my mother and Aunt Renata ran the Low Country Heritage Garden Gala, a huge fundraiser for historic garden preservation that drew donors from Charleston, Hilton Head, and as far as Atlanta. They loved to call it their passion project. What they didn't say, ever, anywhere, was that I was the one who made the whole thing look the way it looked. I designed the branding. I built the sponsor decks. I managed the ticketing platform under a business account linked to my studio. I handled the vendor invoicing portal because my mother found software intimidating and Renata refused to learn. I wrote the donor thank you sequences. Every year, in April, my mother posted photos of herself in a pale linen dress under the live oaks and captioned them with phrases like surrounded by the ones I love most. The retirement dinner was the first time they had forgotten, in front of witnesses, to pretend I was one of them. 2 days later, I scrolled through my mother's Facebook. There she was, at the head of that same mahogany table, beaming between Bennett and Colette. The caption read, "Celebrating a lifetime of family with the ones closest to my heart." I was not cropped out. I was not in the photo at all. And then I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Colette's fiancé had posted a brief, wobbly video to his story that night, taken from across the table. It was only 9 seconds long, but the audio was crisp. My mother's voice. "Oh, sweetheart. Don't poo. You already know how we feel about you." My aunt's laugh. My own voice. Quiet and flat. "Got it. Thank you for the clarity." He took it down by sunrise. Too late. I had already screen recorded it twice and emailed it to myself. I sat in my kitchen that night with my laptop open and asked myself the one question I had avoided for 31 years. Was I ever actually loved in that family? Or had I just been the most reliable source of labor they had? The second I let that question finish forming, the answer was obvious, and it had been obvious for a very long time. I called my closest friend, Imani Ford. Imani had been my roommate in college and had watched my family bulldoze me for a decade. When I told her what had happened, she didn't say anything dramatic. She just said, "Harper, your family doesn't get nervous when they hurt you. They get nervous when they think you might stop fixing things for them. Those are 2 different emergencies." Something in that sentence turned a key I didn't know was in me. I didn't make a rash decision. I made a careful one. I opened every folder connected to the Heritage Garden Gala. I pulled up the ticketing account, which was registered under my LLC. I pulled up the vendor portal, which ran through my studio's payment processor. I pulled up the donor email platform, which was attached to my professional domain. I pulled up the Google Drive that hosted every graphic, every photograph, every sponsor contract, every spreadsheet, every budget reconciliation for the last 4 years. And I drafted one email, calm and unflourished, to the Gala Steering Committee, effective immediately. I was withdrawing my services, my business accounts, my intellectual property, and my name from the Low Country Heritage Garden Gala. Any future use of my design work, my photographs, my platforms, or my studio's name in connection with the event would be considered unauthorized. I copied the committee's treasurer, the printer, the venue coordinator at the historic estate, where the gala was held, and the payment processor's support team. Then I muted the family group thread. I blocked my mother's personal cell, and I sent a separate quiet text to my older brother and my sister. "I'm not coming for Christmas. Please do not show up at my house. I am not discussing this yet. Have you ever spent decades trying to earn warmth from people who only rewarded your usefulness, because once you see the shape of it clearly, you cannot unsee it? And you cannot unfeel it either. The first person to reply wasn't my mother. It was Colette. Of course it was Colette. Because Colette had been raised to be the soft emissary of whatever my mother needed to deliver without looking like the one delivering it. Her text came 9 minutes after my email went out. "Harper, what are you doing? Mom is in tears. This is so embarrassing." I stared at the word embarrassing for a long minute. That was always the family rule. Wasn't it? Their behavior was personal. But my response was a spectacle. I wrote back, "No. I'm choosing not to work under people who don't respect me. That's not embarrassing. That's overdue." She started typing. Stopped. I'm started again. And never sent the message. 40 minutes later, the printer emailed me. She had an invoice approval sitting in my studio's portal that she couldn't route anywhere else. Then the venue coordinator emailed. Then the florist. Then the gala's treasurer herself, a woman named Patrice Donnelly, who wrote a careful note that said, "I'm a little surprised. Harper, your mother mentioned you had stepped back this year. But our records show you as the primary administrator on almost every system." I read that line 3 times. My mother had been telling the committee I wasn't really involved. She had been telling me I was indispensable. She had been telling donors that Renata was the creative genius behind the brand refresh I personally designed 2 years ago. Imani came over that night, with barbecue from the place near the river, and a yellow legal pad. She works in forensic accounting for a firm that handles nonprofit audits, and she has a way of looking at paperwork, like it's a confession, waiting to be translated. We sat on my living room floor and went through 4 years of gala financial records. And the longer we looked, the worse it got. My Aunt Renata had submitted reimbursement requests in 2 consecutive years for the exact same floral centerpiece installation. Once under event decor, and once under hospitality. My mother had expensed an overnight stay at a resort on Kiawa Island as donor outreach. On a weekend when there was no documented donor meeting, there was a charge from a high-end boutique in Charleston, submitted as gift bag procurement. But the amount was more than triple the gift bag budget line. And the boutique didn't sell anything that had ever appeared in a gala gift bag. And because the digital records had run through my systems, those invoices and receipts were archived in folders I had legitimate access to, not because I was looking, but because I was the one who had always been doing the filing. The part that stopped my breath wasn't the money. It was a pitch deck from the previous spring. One I had designed for a corporate sponsor meeting, where my aunt had presented the entire brand identity refresh as her own work. I found a note in the margin of an exported draft. "Don't mention Harper unless they specifically ask. She gets awkward about credit." I read that sentence out loud to Imani. She went very still. Then she said, "Harper, that's not awkwardness about credit. That's a pattern of erasure. They have built an image on your back and told people you didn't want any of it." The next morning I called Patrice Donnelly directly. I didn't rant. I didn't accuse. I told her, as calmly as I would tell a client, that I was formally stepping away from the gala and that I needed my studio's name removed from all current and future materials. I told her there were financial irregularities in past years that she might want an independent party to review. Not as an accusation, but to protect the committee and the donors. I offered to send documentation. I offered a clean handoff. I also told her I would not be providing any further verification, endorsement, or transition support. Patrice was quiet for almost 20 seconds. Then she said, "Harper, thank you for being this straightforward. I'm going to ask our board to pause processing until we understand the scope. By 3 in the afternoon. The gala's online ticket page had been quietly taken down for maintenance. By 5. I had 3 missed calls from my mother and 2 voicemails from my father. By 7, Aunt Renata had left a voicemail that I played exactly twice. It said, "Harper, whatever you think you're doing, you need to stop before you embarrass this family in front of every person who matters in 3 counties. This is not how a Whitaker behaves." I sat on my couch after that voicemail and I laughed out loud. Not from anger, but from recognition. Because that was the sentence. Wasn't it not? "I'm sorry we hurt you." Not, "I see why you're angry. This is not how a Whitaker behaves." Meaning, you are only a Whitaker when you are useful to us. By Monday morning, my mother had sent 14 texts from a number I hadn't blocked. They escalated in a pattern I recognized from childhood. First came "Harper, honey. Please call me. We need to sort this out." Then, "You're frightening your father with this behavior." Then, "People are asking questions. And it's making all of us look bad." Then, and this was the one that finally exposed the shape of her. "Do you realize what you are doing to the gala? Donors are pulling out. This is not who I raised you to be." I wrote back one line, and only one line. "You did not raise me. You deployed me. There is a difference." Then I blocked that number too. By Tuesday, the gala had been officially postponed, and the committee had announced an internal accounting review. By Wednesday, my mother had begun a new campaign. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years started texting me things like, "Your mother is absolutely falling apart, and, whatever this is, can we not do it right before the holidays? And, she says you've been under a lot of stress lately. Is there something we should know?" The suggestion that I was unstable. I knew that move. My mother had used it on 3 of her own siblings, on 2 of my father's friends, on a former neighbor. You don't have to call a woman unhinged in public if you can lean in close and whisper that she's just going through something. Colette texted me late Wednesday night. "I didn't know your name was on all of it." I really didn't know. I stared at that message for a long time before I answered. "You didn't know because you never had to. That was part of the arrangement." She didn't write back until morning. Her answer was 3 words. "I'm sorry. Harper." It was the first real apology anyone in my family had offered me in years. And it came from the sister who had always gotten the seat I had been told not to expect. On Thursday evening, my father called from what he called his study, which I had always called his escape room. He sounded old in a way I hadn't heard before. He said, "Harper, come on now. Your mother is devastated. This has gone far enough. We need to resolve this like a family." I said, "Dad, has anyone apologized to me for the retirement dinner?" He paused. Behind him, I could hear my mother's voice, sharp and fast, saying something about a vendor. He said, "That's not really what this is about right now." I said, "Then I'm not really what this is about either. And we both know it." I hung up. That night, an anonymous post appeared in a Lowcountry community Facebook group. Someone had screen-shared the 9-second video from my sister's fiancé's story. Within 24 hours, it had over 400 comments. Strangers were writing things like, "Isn't Marlene Whitaker the one who runs that garden gala? Where does that money actually go?" Within 48 hours, 2 longtime donors had publicly posted that they were withdrawing their sponsorship pending the outcome of the review. By Saturday night, Imani texted me, a single line. "They're going to come to your door tomorrow. You know that." Right, I did know. I had known it since Thursday. They arrived at 8:45 on Sunday morning. I was in my kitchen, already dressed, with my coffee in both hands and my phone on the counter recording audio. I had made that decision 2 nights earlier. I heard the car doors first. 3 of them in sequence. Then the doorbell. Then the doorbell again. Then my mother's voice. Tight and high. "Harper. Open this door. We need to talk to you right now." Through the window, I could see all 4 of them on my porch. My mother in a cream wool coat with her earrings in and her lipstick on. My father holding a leather portfolio, like he was about to walk into a deposition. Aunt Renata with her arms crossed and her chin lifted. Bennett. My brother, hovering behind them, looking uncomfortable. Which was the closest my brother ever came to accountability. Colette was not with them. That told me more than anything else. I opened the door with the chain on Stida. I said, "I did not invite you here." My mother's face did the thing her face always did. That fast collapse into wounded maternal panic. "Harper. Please. Please. We have driven 2 hours. We just want to talk." My father lifted the portfolio a few inches. "There are some forms that the committee is asking for. They just need your signature confirming a transition period. Once we get through the review, we can deal with the rest." My aunt spoke over him. "This has gone far enough. You are embarrassing your mother in front of every important person she knows. Are you trying to destroy her?" I looked at Renata. I looked at the leather portfolio. I looked at my mother's carefully applied lipstick. I slid the chain off and let them into my narrow front hall. I did not offer them the living room. I did not offer coffee. I stood with my back to the hallway wall and I said, "You have 10 minutes. My mother tried first. She reached for my hand, and I moved mine. She said, "Honey, the gala is falling apart. People are saying terrible things. Everything your father and I have worked for. We need you to call Patrice and tell her this was all a misunderstanding. We need you to say you authorized the reimbursements. We need you to explain that you are still involved this year and that you support the committee continuing under current leadership." I almost admired her for how cleanly she listed her needs. Not one of them involved me. Not one of them was about what had happened at the retirement dinner. I said, "Mom, look at what you just asked me for. You want me to lie for you? Then lie about the lie. Then publicly vouch for the people who have been laughing at me at every family gathering since I was old enough to understand the jokes." My aunt snapped. "Oh please. You have always been too sensitive to survive this family." My father said, "Renata." Not sharp. Just tired. I turned to him. "Dad, did you know that Renata has been submitting duplicate reimbursements for the last 2 years?" The hallway went so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in my kitchen behind me. My mother said, "Too fast. That is not true. Those are administrative errors." I said, "I have the invoices. I have the bank records. I have the vendor confirmations. They are not administrative errors. And I didn't go digging for them. They came through my systems because I was the one doing the work." Bennett, who had been silent, said quietly, "Jesus." My mother's voice cracked upward. "Harper, you would not do this. You would not do this to your own mother. Over a joke at dinner. Over a joke." I looked at her and I said, "Mom, it was not a joke. And this is not retaliation. This is the truth, catching up with a structure that has been running on my silence and my labor for a very long time." My aunt went for the oldest weapon in the family arsenal. "Contempt. You know what you are. Harper, you are ungrateful. After everything this family has given you." I said, "Name one thing." She opened her mouth. She closed it. She said, "That is absurd. We gave you everything." I said, "Name one." She couldn't. My father lowered himself slowly into the bench by the front door, which was not built to be sat on, and which wobbled under him. He put the leather portfolio down on the floor. He said, "Harper, I should have stopped a lot of this a long time ago." I almost cried at that. I almost did. But I had spent too many years crying at almost apologies from him that never turned into action. So I just nodded once and kept standing. Then my aunt, because she could not help herself, said the sentence that I think she had been holding inside her for years. The sentence that was closest to the real machinery of our family. She said, "You don't understand. Harper, people give money because Marlene is warm, because Colette is sweet, because Bennett is charming. You lend the operation credibility. You make the whole thing look serious. We needed you there. We didn't need you fussed over," my brother said. Very quietly. "Renata, stop talking." But it was too late. My mother had closed her eyes. My father had put his head in his hands. And I felt, for the first time in my entire life, something in my chest that was not grief, not rage, not the awful hunger to finally be chosen. It was stillness. I said, "Thank you, Aunt Renata. That is the most honest thing anyone in this family has said to me in 31 years. You did not want a daughter. You wanted a department. You wanted a resume you could borrow. You wanted a logo you didn't have to credit. You wanted a woman who was too trained to ask to be loved out loud." I told them, then, what I had already done. I had already signed a sworn statement for the gala's independent review confirming my role in each platform and designating who on the committee had approved what. I had already transferred all event accounts out of my business's infrastructure and provided a clean set of access credentials to Patrice. I had already consulted with a lawyer, a quiet, unshowy woman Imani had referred me to, who had walked me through what my legal exposure looked like and what it did not. I had already changed the name of my studio's registered email because it contained the word Whitaker. And I no longer wanted my surname to be the first thing a client saw. I did not need their signatures. I did not need their cooperation. I did not need their permission. I needed them out of my front hall. My mother looked at me like I was a stranger on her porch. She said, "How could you do this to me?" I said. "You stood at a table full of people and told me I didn't need paper to know how you felt about me. You were right. I didn't. I just needed to believe I was wrong about what the paper said. And now I don't." I opened the door. My aunt said something under her breath that I did not hear and did not want to hear. Bennett walked out first. Actually, without looking at anyone. Like a man who had just realized he was going to have to think about his entire life. My father picked up the leather portfolio, paused in the doorway, and said, "Harper, I will call you next week. Not about the gala. About me." I nodded. I did not say yes. I did not say no. My mother was the last one out. She stopped in the doorway. Her mouth opened and closed. She said, "I did love you." I said, "I believe you thought you did." That is not the same thing. The fallout happened faster than they expected. Because truth tends to travel faster than people in nice coats can chase it down. Patrice's committee brought in an independent accountant who found enough documented irregularities across 4 years to compel repayment from both my mother and my aunt. No one was criminally charged. That was not the point. The point was that the Low Country Heritage Garden Society's board of directors, after a 30-minute closed session, asked my mother to step down from the chair of the gala and asked my aunt to resign from the society's fundraising committee entirely. 3 days later, a local columnist who had covered the gala for years published a piece titled something like, "When Charity Becomes a Family Brand." My mother was not named in it. She didn't have to be. Everyone in Charleston knew. Aunt Renata sold her lake house in February. Quietly. For reasons she told people were about simplification. My father moved out of the main house that spring. He did not move in with another woman. He moved into a small apartment with a view of the marsh and started attending a men's group at a church. I had not known he knew the address of. He called me, as he had promised. The week after they came to my door, he did not ask me to come home. He did not ask me to forgive him. He said, "Harper, I watched them do it for 30 years, and I told myself you were tougher than they were. That was not love. That was me using you to stay comfortable. I am not asking for anything. I just wanted to say it out loud to you one time." My brother Bennett sent me a long email, 2 weeks later, that was more honest than anything he had said to my face in a decade. He admitted that when we were teenagers, my mother had told him privately that I was the difficult one and that it was his job, as the oldest, to keep the peace by making sure I didn't cause scenes. He said he had carried that instruction into adulthood without ever examining it. He said he did not expect me to forgive him for all the times he had patted my shoulder instead of standing up for me. Colette came to see me in Savannah in early January. She brought her own coffee. She sat on my couch and cried for a while before she said anything. Then she told me that she had spent her whole life believing she was the family's favorite because she was the most lovable, and she was now realizing that she had been the family's favorite because she was the most compliant. And that was a much harder thing to live with. She said, "Harper, I don't know how to be your sister. I was never trained to be. I was trained to be Mom's. Can I try?" I told her she could try. I told her it was going to be slow. I told her that trying, for me, would look like her no longer participating in conversations about me that didn't include me. She nodded. She has kept her word so far. I spent Christmas that year with Imani and 3 other friends in a rented cabin in the mountains of North Carolina. We burned a very bad Yule log. We played a card game. None of us understood the rules of. We laughed until my ribs hurt. In February, a board member from the Independent Review Committee, who had watched me handle the transition with what she called uncommon professionalism, recommended my studio for a major rebrand project with a statewide literacy nonprofit. I signed the contract the first week of March. It is the largest contract my studio has ever had. The irony is so sharp it almost embarrasses me. The family that told me I did not need paper to know how they felt about me lost their most visible paper platform in the same season that my career got written onto a much bigger one. My mother mailed me a letter in April. A real letter. On her own stationery. In her own handwriting. It was 2 pages long. She did not ask me to come home. She did not ask me to forgive her. She wrote that she had spent her entire adult life confusing being admired with being loved, and confusing being needed with being known. She wrote that she understood now that she had used my competence as a way to never have to look at me as a whole person. She wrote that she was in therapy for the first time in her life, and that she was not telling me this, so I would feel sorry for her. She wrote that she did not know if I would ever want a relationship with her again, and that if I didn't, she would understand, and that if I did, it would be slower and smaller than anything she had ever imagined a relationship with her daughter being. I have read that letter 4 times. I have not written back yet. I might. I might not. That is allowed to be an open question. Because for the first time in my life, I am allowed to have open questions about my own family without racing to close them for everyone else's comfort. Here is what I learned, and what I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Being the reliable one in a family that does not know how to love, you can feel like a role. Sometimes it even feels like an identity. But if your love is only welcomed when it arrives carrying something, Achille, a signature, a logo, a clean spreadsheet, a plausible image of family, then you are not being loved. You are being used with a smile on. The moment I stopped confusing being needed with being valued, everything in my life widened. My work got better. My friendships got deeper. My sleep got longer. My chest stopped hurting on holidays. So tell me, honestly, if your own family humiliated you in public and then stood on your porch 8 days later demanding you rescue them, would you open the door? And if you did, what would you say when you finally stopped pretending you had misheard them the first time?